Hello, my name is Cheryl Matson and thank you for joining me for the Waves of Chevron quilting tutorial. And I'm going to show you how to make short work of the 92 half square triangles that are in this quilt. I'm going to also give you some tips on matching up those points perfectly and to finally sew that top together to avoid distortion in the top. Now this file is a PDF file that you can download underneath the video on the website, and I will definitely give you the website here in a bit if you don't have it. There is also in here the cutting instructions, the fabric requirements, and some little layout information that's going to help you through the demo so that you shouldn't have to take too many notes. This is the only picture of the quilt layout, and you'll be using that later on as well. This is sandwiching information, and I have things on making the binding tape, the double mitered corner for your binding, and if you don't know what that is, that's so when the binding goes on your quilt, it's going to miter on both sides and it looks very neat and clean. I'm also going to show you how you can overlap those binding ends for a perfect fit. But let's get started on the half square triangles. The tools that you'll need are a pounce pad, and this is one I use that has the iron off white chalk. It is available on our website. If you've never used one before, this is a little plug, and you take that out and you put the chalk in there, and I never like to fill it too full because then it'll poof out and it makes a mess. This is in a little cup, and you see this little pad here. You can maybe see the chalk on there, and that's what you rub over the stencil to get the image on the fabric. Now the first time you use this, or sometimes throughout pouncing your stencils, you'll want to tap this on the table or in your hand, and that's going to work that chalk down into this pad so that you can do that. If white chalk is not going to show up on your fabric, you might want to consider a washable Crayola marker, and they come in a lot of different colors, so that'll help you on some of your fabrics. Or just a mechanical pencil with a fine tip, and you can then just trace through the stencils. It does take a little longer that way, but it works. Then there are, of course, the stencils. Now I have invented a set of 12 different stencils, and each stencil makes a different finished size of a half square triangle. This one is the one we're going to be using for Waves of Chevron, and it finishes at 5 by 5 inch block. They start at 1 inch finished and go all the way up to 6. So this line right here, this perforated line around there, that's what you'll be lining up on the fabric straight grain. So it's either straight of grain or the straight grain. You'll be lining this up, and this is your bias direction. I also wanted to show you each stencil comes with its own set of instructions, and I call this step 1, step 2, step 3. And step 1 is the transfer, then there's the sewing, and then there's the cutting apart. So everything you see here in the video you're going to find in here, so you shouldn't have to take notes on that either. Now in the cutting instructions, if you've printed them out, you've noticed I haven't cut a whole bunch of little squares for my half square triangles. I have a big piece of fabric for the half square triangles like this. And in my patterns, I'll tell you to cut them in strips, but this is what I like to do myself. So what we'll do, always stencil the wrong side of the fabric. Now for the brown that you see in the picture of the quilt, there's more brown half square triangles than blue. And you will make 4 rows of 7 images on this piece of fabric to get all of the half square triangles, and it's over 50. I can't remember exactly what it is right now, but it says on your printout what it is. So again, I'm going to line this up with the fabric straight of grain. The other thing you'll need is painter's tape, and I use 2 strips. Get this straight again. Excuse me. I'm going to tape this down so it's on that straight of grain. And I only tape 2 sides down because if you tape 4 sides, the stencil has a tendency to buckle. And this is perfect math, and so you want to keep it that way. So here's the pounce pad. You do not do this, you just wipe it over the stencil. Now you want to get, you can see this is really fast, faster than tracing. You want to make sure that you get all of these lines here and all of these lines here. So you see I wiped that. That's not going to take too long to go across with 7 images, but I am going to show you how to duplicate it. It truly is a stencil. If you notice this little corner here and this little square up here, you want to make sure that those are matching this way along this line. So one of the key things, you want to get that little chalk right in that square, and you'll see the chalk lines line up here along this edge. You want to get your square in there, and you want to make sure this line is lined up with that one, and then we're just going to tape it down again. And this is literally so fast. So there we have 2 images. Now I'm not going to go all the way across here with all 7 of them because I don't want to take that much time on the video. But I do want to show you, I said you needed 4 rows of these for the 50-some half-square triangles of the brown you need. So I'm going to position this so that it stencils beyond these points and dots, but I'll put the straight of grain. So I don't know if you can see that. There we are at the straight of grain. Whoops. Get that down there. This little edge on the table is stopping me. And the reason I'm going away from there is because you want to give yourself some wiggle room. Okay, so there we go. That one. And you see there's space in here. Now you could either cut that in half, cut these strips apart after it's pounced with a rotary cutter, or just take a pair of scissors. You just don't want to cut any of this stencil image. So you cut those apart, and then you'll sandwich them right sides together with your alternate fabric. And that's all there is to pouncing. Now on the blue fabric, which I have batiks for both of them, you'll see that it says 2 rows plus 4 images. There's the 4 images on the blue fabric. So let's pause for a minute, and I'll be back to show you how to. Now that we have our fabric pounced, what we're going to do is we are going to layer it right sides together with our alternate fabric. This has already been sewn, but you'll be able to see exactly what I do. So you'll put right sides together, and then you're going to want to pin those fabrics together in all these little triangle spots. And you'll smooth this out as you go so you have a nice flat surface, and you're going to pin in all these places. You want to pin away from these diagonal lines. Those are our stitching lines, and if you just pin in those places, the pins never get in your way. So once you have that pinned, now you're going to sew. I like to use a 2.0 millimeter stitch length, or if you don't have that measurement, 12 stitches per inch. And what you'll do once it's pinned all the way from one side to the other is you'll start down here on one of these ends of this diagonal line, and you'll just start sewing, and you'll come up to the point, and you'll come down, and you can see here that I picked up the needle, and I guess I came down over there, but you're going to pick up the needle, come here, and then start going. I did the same thing here. So you'll just basically zigzag down one way, and then from the other end as you come back, then you'll sew this second parallel line. One thing I tell people is always take your time when you're pouncing, sewing, and cutting, because again, that stencil is perfect math. And if you get right in the center of that chalk line, and if you take your time cutting and pouncing, you will have perfect half square triangles. One thing I did want to mention on the pounce pad, let me back up a little bit, because this little cup and that doesn't have a latch on it, I usually in my quilt room, I will put a rubber band around it to secure it so I don't have a mess in my room. So now what we're ready to cut these apart. So you're going to get your a ruler, and you're going to cut all of these vertical lines between those. And let me just position it here because those pins are in my way. And what you'll do, you want it to square your half square triangles. You want to make sure your ruler is lined up with this broken chalk line. You're going to slide it over here, and you're going to go right through the middle of this chalk line with that squared. And so you'll cut that apart, and you'll do that with every one of these lines. Now when you do that, it's going to look like this. Then what we're going to do, and I want to talk to you about this funny little edge there in a minute too. Now we're going to cut these apart and square our half square triangles. So because I have cut these straight, that's this edge, I'm going to line that ruler up on that edge, and I don't know if you can see the chalk line very well in the video, but I'm in the middle of that chalk line, and my ruler is on the edge of that quilt block, my half square triangle. Use a good sharp blade, and I'm going to cut these sides off. This way, this is probably starting to look a little familiar to you now, that little half square triangle block. Okay, I'm squared up, and again I like to take my time because perfect math. So we've got this, and now there's our half square triangle. I'm going to go here right through the middle, and then as soon as I cut this, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that hanging over fabric there, and then we'll move on to the next part of the video. I cut that apart. Those are my 1/4 inch seams. Those are 1/2 inch apart. So I go right down the middle, and I've got this beautiful half square triangle that should be, if I'd cut everything and sewn it right, 5.5 by 5.5. So let's see how I did. Put that there and there. Where is it? Probably need to press it first. Okay. There we are. Can you get that, John? That it is 5.5 by 5.5 square. Because we've taken our time. You're done. You're done squaring. You're done sewing. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this fabric that you see here at the bottom. See how it's uneven? Well, we get that a lot of times when we buy fabric, and I did pre-wash my fabric, and I do like to spray it with a stabilizer too before I pounce and sew them. But this, after it was out of the dryer and the ironing, this is how the edge was. That's how it came to me. But by lining my stencil up with the straighter grain, guess what? I'm going to get nice straight grain and really good bias direction. So these half square triangles are going to manage really nicely in my quilt top. Let's start pressing our half square triangles. Now you've heard of setting your seams, and that's really important because if you haven't pressed this seam and you feel it, it's bumpy. You can also see that chalk in there, and it is iron off. But when you set the seams, you press those down, and what that does is it flattens them, and it's going to reduce the bulk in your quilt. And you notice I'm pressing, I'm not ironing. Okay, so those are nice and flat. Now if you are pressing your half square triangles or anything, whenever you want the seam allowance to be pressed towards something, put that on top. So I want my seam allowances pressed toward the dark. So if I put that on top, it's just going to show that. Now I need to turn this around a little bit because I'm right-handed. And when I press a seam for a half square triangle, what I like to do is I like to take the tip of the iron and I just kind of finger press it with that iron, and if you can watch that seam in that corner, see how it comes right up to that stitching line. And now I'm going to come here and I'm going to finger press down to the other end, and then I'm going to press it. Now you know that flat seams are always the best in your quilts, and so the flatter your seams the better. And I'm going to show you something that my husband made for me that I really love, and it is called a quilt clapper. This is like a tailor's clapper, and it's made of hardwood and it's heavy, and you could put a 12-inch block under here. We have, I think he's made 3 sizes actually that you can look at on the website, but these are really nice, and let me show you what I do with it. I've got my block, I pressed it, and that is lumpy. I want something flat. So in here I have a product called Best Press, and it is a stabilizer. And I like to put it in these little misting bottles, and you can dilute it a little bit, like you could do 3/4 to 1, 3/4 Best Press and 1 water. And these little bottles mist it out very nicely. And so I'll just mist my little seam there, and I'm going to get my iron now, and I'm just going to press that. And I'm going to hold the iron here until that stabilizer is dry. Now I don't know tailor's clappers, what they do is tailors will use those on really heavy seams and stuff when they're making suits or jeans or something like that, specialty things, and it really flattens those seams for them. Okay, let me see. Yes, it's dry and hot. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it over here. I'm going to press it down a little bit more. Now I'm going to put this clapper right on top of there, and I'm going to let it sit. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'll press my next one. And I'm going to let that one cool. So again, I'm just going to start here at the point, and if you can see, that's coming right down to the stitching, up here to the stitching, and press it down. There it is, still bumpy. Get my Best Press and spritz it on there. Set down. It's not dry yet. Put quite a bit there on there. I like to use this stabilizer on even the fabric after I pre-wash it before I pounce the fabric and sew it and everything, because it does stiffen it and it makes it so much easier to work with. So if that's something that you have, you know, you're fraying and all that kind of stuff, it will help with some of that. Okay, that feels hot. Now this surface is hot. It's warm from this half square triangle being hot. I'm just going to go ahead and put it on this one because it absorbs all that moisture and heat. Don't know if you can see how nice and smooth that is, but it's really going to help you in when you start putting your quilts together. So now all we got to do is trim off the dog ears, and then we'll start assembling the rolls. So we'll come back in a minute for that. There, once you have all your half square triangles done, we're ready to assemble the rows. But I do like to trim off these little, what we call dog ears on these half square triangles, because the less bulk you have in your quilt, the better. And all you have to do that is just snip right here, and you don't have to take a rotary cutter. I've seen people do that, and it just takes too much time. So you can get these and go watch a movie and trim off your dog ears. Now here's what, the first 2 rows look like. And in your PDF file, you'll have a little page that looks like this. This is the quilt layout. And I enlarged it so that you could see it here on the video easier, and took off the borders so that you could see that I am numbering these rows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you can number yours there. I had a lot of trouble when I put this quilt together the first time because it gets very confusing and you really can lose your place easy. So what turned out to be the best method for me is to put one of these numbers, and I'll show you what I did, at the top of the row. Here's a 1 and a 2. So this is the top of the quilt. And I assembled the rows vertically, the lengthwise, each one, and then I moved on to the next. And if you wanted, you could assemble 4 rows and then assemble 4 more rows and then hook those together for to be easier at your machine. So you start out with the row, laying them out and putting all these together, and then you're going to press all the seams at once. So for row 1, you'll see that I pressed all my seams this way. When I get row 2 put together, and I'm going to do that after I put all the half square triangles together. When I get row 2 together, then I'm going to press these the opposite way. And what that's going to do, remember I talked about getting those points to match? This is how that's going to happen for you, because you're going to do what's called nesting your seams. Now I'm going to pull this up the sideways here. Of course, we're not going to be sewing this side together, but I want to show you how those nest up with one another. So I'm just going to scrunch those together and see how those seams just come nice and together. And you can pin them if you want to hold them in place, and that works well too. The other thing I did when I sewed the rows together is if you can see on here that this side shows the point of the triangle. And when I put it under my sewing machine, I'm going to sew that side with my 1/4 inch seam so I can always catch that point there as I go down. Now remember I talked to you a little bit about making your quilt so that it doesn't go awry. It is nice and squared so it doesn't goof up on you. At the bottom of row 2, let me get these numbers around so you can see. Here's row 1, and I started sewing up here. So I sewed all the way down the row to the bottom. At the bottom, and you could use a pin if you have some of these clips, put it there. Put it at the bottom of row 2. Now your next row, when you attach it, instead of starting at the top, you're going to start sewing at the bottom. And that's what prevents that distortion in your quilt top. So that's how you'll attach your rows. And if you'll keep those numbers on there and watch how you sew your ends together, you're going to have a beautiful little top. Now in the PDF file, it tells you how to piece your border strips, these, so that you have invisible seams. And this is just a picture of how I quilted mine, and I put a little minky fabric on the back so it was nice and soft, and I actually made 2 of them for my niece as a wedding gift, and that's why I don't have that quilt here today. So those are the rows. And remember I talked to you about the binding. It's really, so many people have so much trouble connecting their binding ends for a perfect fit. And because this quilt will be used, it's better for a bias strip binding. I only use straight strip binding, straight of grain bindings if it's a table topper or something that's not going to be loved. So if you will download this file, it's on the videos page, And here's where you download the PDF. And this will show you what I'm doing, and the PDF supports it. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love to see pictures of your quilts and the stencils, pounce pads, and many other patterns and products are available on our website. Visit us here, and thank you for watching, and have a lovely quilting day.